Okay, so chapter 1, we're going to talk about microbes. Okay, this is the same PowerPoint that you have uploaded on Blackboard. So, microbiology is basically the study of living things or microbes. Micro means small, too small to be seen without some type of magnification. In other words, you've got to use a microscope to actually visualize or see these things. Um, what are the types of microbes we have? Well, we've got bacteria, which I'm sure everybody knows about. We've got fungi, athlete's foot, um, ringworm, yeast infections. We've got algae. Anybody who's ever had a fish tank knows about algae, or who has a horse trough outside, all that green slime, that's algae. Protozoa, helminths, and viruses, which we will go through in just a bit. That's the wrong computer. The computer that's actually hooked up to this is over here. Sorry. Okay, so microbes and our planet. So, bacteria, the small, teeny tiny microscopic organisms, have been on our planet for about 3.5 billion years. When we talk about, the primordial ooze, when our planet was first coming into itself, the first life forms were actually microscopic. They were bacterial because we didn't have the complexity built into our genomes yet. So they were the only living inhabitants on the planet for about 2 billion years. Okay. Um, Most of them were what we call prokaryotes. Karyo means nut, or it means, in this case, nucleus, which is an organelle that holds the genetic material inside of a cell. Pro means before. So prokaryotic means before the nucleus existed. These are very, very simple cells. They have no true nucleus. So it's kind of a pre-nucleus, before the nucleus, like I said. Eukaryotic organisms, eu means true. So when eukaryotic organisms came around, they actually did have an organelle that housed all of the genetic material. So eukaryotic means true nucleus. They arose about 1.8 billion years ago. Eu, like I said, means true. Karyo, again, nut, or the nucleus in this case, means true nucleus. Precursors to the organisms that eventually formed basically the multicellular organisms we know today. So, as we got more complex, as the cells got more complex, it allowed those cells to actually create something more complex, something like, I don't know, a fish type organism, a jellyfish maybe, because jellyfish are pretty simple. But that ability to genetically make our code, our instruction manual, more complex, excuse me, allowed us to make bigger and more complex things. Now, I know you're probably going, okay, something the size of a tadpole isn't that big. But if you think back to, we started as single cell organisms that didn't even have a nucleus, it makes sense that as our genetics got more complicated, our structures got more complicated. Now, microbes, they are actually a positive part of our planet. I know most people think of microbes as diseases. You think of viruses, you think of bacterial infections, you think about athlete's foot, maybe. But there are microbes that are beneficial to us as a whole, as a planet. So, photosynthetic microorganisms. Photosynthetic, they use light to make energy. Okay, photo, light, synthesize to make. They account for about 70% of photosynthesis on Earth. They are a major contributor to oxygen in our atmosphere. Now, think about it. Photosynthesis is something that takes carbon dioxide and water and makes it into sugar that can be used as a fuel source, can be used to make ATP. The thing is, one of the byproducts of that is oxygen. Do we need oxygen? Yeah, we need oxygen. So, having these photosynthetic organisms, even though they're microscopic, it creates an atmosphere for us to live in comfortably. Okay, sorry, I had to take a break and get some water. Different microbes work in work to change our soil, our water, even our atmosphere. So we have some microbes that produce gases like carbon dioxide, nitric oxide, and methane. Now you may go, okay, but I don't breathe those. Well, that's true. The combination of these actually helps regulate the temperature of the earth itself. So if you've got a wonky combination of these, the earth's temperature would be fluctuating like crazy. By having microbes that do this for us, it helps to kind of maintain the earth within livable limits for us. Enormous underground communities of microbes influence weathering, mineral extraction, and soil formation. So microbes can break stuff down. They can turn one thing into another. And even though you're thinking about this as it's something microscopic doing something microscopic, you have billions of these in the soil, well, in the ground. It helps to enrich the soil. I mean, think about how you would fertilize a lawn. Usually you go and you get cow manure. You can even use human manure. If you watched The Martian with Matt Damon, he used the waste products from the astronauts to actually make fertilizer to give to the potatoes, right? Okay. So, weathering. You know that if you've got something that is iron or something that contains iron outside for long periods of time, eventually it'll start to rust. One of the reasons that that happens is because of oxidation caused by different things in the air that are basically microbes. Okay. Bacteria and fungi, they live in close associations with plants and they help them to obtain nutrients and protect them against disease. There are some fungi that actually live on the roots of certain plants, and they are able to digest, let's say, nutrients that the plant itself can't. But as it digests those nutrients, it releases things that to them are useless. But as it releases those things, the roots are able to soak it up, basically getting nutrients that the microbe thought were garbage. That type of relationship, that symbiotic relationship, actually means that the plant benefits from the fungi being on their roots. And usually the roots benefit from the plant as well because the plant will release waste products that the fungi can actually use as an energy source or as a food source. We actually have bacteria in our gut that help us digest things as well, help us digest things, and they release vitamins that we need but can't make ourselves. Okay. Microbes are big players in turning over nutrients and other organisms to use. Fungi, they're major decomposers. They basically break down organic material for use by other organisms. You know how if you see a dead animal on the side of the road, you'll start to see it kind of disintegrate after a while? That is decomposition, it's decomposing. Fungi actually help that process along. And now I know you're going, oh, that's gross. Ugh. The thing is, think about it. If things died and just stayed there forever, we would have dead bodies everywhere. By having the ability to decompose and break these things down, we actually add to the fertility of the soil. Some decomposers include other things that are bigger, even like flies and things like that. But when it comes down to the fungi, being able to break that down into its component parts kind of helps one, get rid of it, and two, creates new sources of material for other things. Bacteria are key in the nitrogen and sulfur cycles, making those nutrients available to other organisms. We need nitrogen. We need some, not a lot, of sulfur. There are other animals that also need those things. So, having bacteria that can break things down and release the nitrogen and release the sulfur means that we get that without having to necessarily make it ourselves or extract it ourselves. It's there and it's available for us. Continuing on this positive spin on bacteria. So, historically, we have used bacteria or microbes for a very, very long time. Um, One of the, I guess, well, two of the most obvious would be for bread. To make bread, you put yeast in there. The yeast rises. It makes gas. Well, it rises. It makes gases. That's what makes your bread so light and fluffy. The fact that those yeasts that were in there actually produced gas. That's why when you look at a slice of bread, there are little holes. It almost looks spongy. Alcohol production. I'm sure everybody knows that you have to ferment juice to make alcohol, or you have to ferment the stuff you get from hops to make beer. These are also pretty yeast um, specific, but by those organisms creating the alcohol, we get alcoholic beverages. Cheese. I don't know how many of you have seen blue cheese. Blue cheese has little blue speckles. That's actually a mold that's in there. Our cheeses have to also kind of go through that same processing that allows us to have the flavors of cheese that we have, depending on what you use. Treatment of wounds and lesions. So, antibiotics came from bacteria. The fact that we have antibiotics, the fact that they exist at all, is because somebody was looking at a plate and figured out that there was this one thing that cleared all the bacteria away and went, oh, wait a minute, how's that working? And isolated the chemical that it was using to do that. And that was kind of our first antibiotic. Mining precious minerals, sewage treatment. You can buy, well, I'm sure everybody knows what a septic tank is. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. A septic tank has the waste products from a house, right? What do? You have to treat it. You can't just let it sit there. So you buy things like Ridex, stuff like that, that actually helps to break the solids down. And believe it or not, those are microbes that you're introducing into the system to help break everything down, break down the solids. Okay, recent uses of microbes by humans. Genetic engineering. It's an area of biotechnology that manipulates the genetics of microbes, plants, and animals for creating new products and genetically modified organisms. So, when scientists are trying to learn something new, when they're trying to learn something um, novel, they usually start with something very simple. The simplest thing that we have is bacteria. Introducing genetic genetic genes into them is actually fairly simple. You introduce this little circlet of DNA into the bacteria, they absorb it, then you use specific enzymes to cut it open and insert whatever it is that you want to look at. Being able to do that in bacteria has actually allowed us to learn more, that has allowed us to um, advance on that, to make more complex changes and things like GMO tomatoes that instead of rotting within 2 weeks now can last for about 3 4. Recombinant DNA technology, the transfer of genetic material from one organism to another to deliberately alter the DNA and produce a specific product. Again, these kind of go together, but it's being able to move genetic material from one thing to another. So, sorry, the autoclave just went off. So, the best example that I can think of offhand, and you can actually look this up on Google if you want to, bioluminescence is the ability to glow. There are jellyfish, there are algae that have the ability to glow in the dark. Sorry, guys. They have taken those genes and inserted them in other things. There are glow in the dark mice, there are actually glow in the dark kittens that they have pictures of. But transferring that gene, the first things we did that with were microbes because they were small, they were simple, they were easy to manipulate, they come in huge numbers. So it allowed us to kind of learn how to do that so that we could take it into more complex organisms. And finally, bioremediation. The use of microorganisms, either naturally occurring or artificially introduced, to restore stability or clean up toxic pollutants. Okay, so everybody knows about oil spills. They happen. It's one of the things that we, don't like, but it happens. Back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was an oil tanker called the Exxon Valdez, and it ripped open, and there was oil everywhere. I want to say it was up toward Alaska. It wasn't like the BP, what is it, Deepwater Horizon thing where it was coming up from the ground. This actually came from the oil tanker that was on the water. So we had oil all over the place. One of the things that was used to try and help to break that down was microbes. There are specific microbes that can basically eat the oil and break it down into component parts so that it isn't oil anymore. That is one of the things that they did, kind of like the Rid-X, right? We pour the Rid-X in there, it's a powder. Kind of the same thing. You've got this powder that is actually microbes that can eat the oil and break it down. So you sprinkle it over the surface. They did do this with the Deepwater Horizon BP oil break and all of that. But the amount of oil for the Exxon Valdez versus the amount of oil for BP, completely different. So it wasn't as easy to use it for the BP disaster. Okay, so this is going to be part one.